You know, they want to make everything about affirmation and nothing about negation, when in fact it's almost entirely about negation. It's almost entirely about the refusal of things, recognizing them as that which will lead to chaos and suffering, and saying, no, I will not go there. I will not do that. And sadly, there's so little courage in the world to make that statement, to wrong, to say no to the doing of wrong deeds, because people want the little trinkets that are tossed before them by their masters for doing things that they have absolutely no right to do. And again, their masters aren't doing this. That's why I keep trying to explain to people, yes, the dark occultists of this world understand how the mind and how the motivations operate, and they're all too willing to dangle that carrot out in front of you. But you're the one who's doing the action, and therefore the culpability lies with the one who is doing the action. The overwhelming bulk of the culpability and consequence under natural law lies with the one who is actually taking the action. And a lot of people will fight and argue over that too. Go right ahead. It'll never change the reality that an order barker, one who is just barking out orders, okay, is not going to deal with the same level of karmic natural law consequence than the person who follows their immoral order will. That is the reality of how natural law functions. So you can blame it on the elitists sitting up in their ivory towers telling people do this, do that, all you want. They're not the people who are actually destroying people's rights. The police and the military are the ones who are actually taking those actions to destroy other people's rights, which they have no right to do themselves. But they're the ones taking those actions. On the next slide, I reiterated in so many words, in a slightly different way, what I said last week about these people do not have conscience. They do not have that definitive knowledge in hand, or at least they're not exercising it. Whether they have it or not, regardless of whether they have it or not, they're not exercising it. So I wrote on an image in front of images of the police and military, by definition, by the very definition of the term, if you are following orders, you cannot be exercising conscience. These are complete diametrically opposed opposites. They are antitheses. Antitheses, completely diametrically opposed ideas. It is an impossibility to do both of these things at the same time. And yet there are so many people that will tell you that that's possible. It is not possible. It is not possible. Because even if you're following an order that you believe is right, and you're following it because you are under orders, you're not really doing that action because you know it to be right. You're following it because you were ordered to. If you're following orders, and if you know something is wrong, whether you know something is wrong or not, if it is wrong and you're choosing to follow it, you're certainly not exercising your conscience. People who willfully act out of conscience do not do so because they're saying that they're following orders. That's not why they're doing it. They're doing it because they definitively know the difference between right and wrong and are choosing the right over the wrong. And that is not what any cop, any soldier in the history of humanity has ever been doing. They have been following orders, and they're all too happy to tell you that. And this goes back to, I want to even drudge up some old things. I'm going to put on the podcast that video that I posted back months ago of a cop who was an African-American cop in a major U.S. city. I think he was outside of Washington, D.C. or in Washington, D.C. And he said, if I were ordered to do it, I would enforce segregation laws against African American citizens. In other words, if the Congress passed a law saying there's now segregation laws are now back in place, we're going to begin discriminating against all African American human beings, I would, as an African American even, which is showing you it has nothing to do with the fact that he's African American. It's because the reason I even emphasize that in the show when I brought this up is because this being's belief in authority, his religion, his erroneous religious beliefs, okay, his dogma is even more powerful than his identification with whatever race he claims to be a member of. And this is the case with almost anyone who believes in authority. That trumps every other form of identification. And I've talked about how race is basically an illusion as well. And, people who identify with that don't understand what's really going on. They don't get it, regardless of where that racism may be coming from, or who's enacting it, or who's putting those ideas out there. It's always an illusion of false identification, with the false ego self. And that cop, he probably even has that level of racial identification, and that is completely and utterly trumped by his identification with authority, because he's saying, even if you want to oppress people I generally identify with in other areas of my life, I'm still going to say, yeah, I'll oppress them because I believe you have the right to do that because you passed a law and I'm the enforcer of that law. That's all I do is follow orders. That's the definition of not having a conscience. This individual does not possess a conscience. He does not have that knowledge. He's certainly not exercising a conscience, making a decision like that, or claiming that he would make a decision like that. And this is the most reprehensible type of human being that exists. There is no fouler form of human being that exists on the planet. You're below an animal. Animals don't make choices like that. You are beneath animal consciousness, far below it. And it's sad. It's not something, I don't want to hate people like that. It's so sad. You're so ill, you don't even understand how ill you are. You are so destroyed. Your real self is devastated, is totally annihilated, is totally destroyed. And you don't even care enough about yourself to even know that. The people who continue to tread on other people's rights, think somehow that they have some kind of a right to do this, think somehow that they own someone else when they don't even own their own selves. They don't even own their own minds or actions, okay? They want to give away personal responsibility to some master who's going to tell them everything that they need to do, and that'll make it okay. Endlessly justify their actions. And so do people other people who think they have these imagined rights, who think that they're allowed to be doing what they're doing because some psychopath in a suit and tie wrote it down in a book. You can write anything down and say you have a right to do it, but that'll never make it true. You can claim you can, put infant children on spits and roast them over coals and eat them, but that's not going to ever make that true. It's never going to make it true. It's always going to be a wrong, forever, for eternity. Writing it down is not going to change a thing, which is why people have to get out of this mind control that somehow written down laws that are penned by man are somehow always in harmony with the laws of nature, when nothing could be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of them are not in keeping with natural law, and therefore leading people deeper and deeper into a chaotic manifestation of reality. Justification. People love it because they try to use it to absolve themselves of their personal responsibility for making the right choice, or the wrong choice, as the case may be. It comes from Latin jus, which means right, or law. Okay? Which is the root word for justice. We will have justice when we are really living in harmony with true law, natural law. That's when we will be living in a state of right action. These come from the same word. The verb facere, which means to make or to create, forms the other part of it, and that's what justification is doing. It is a feeble attempt to turn a wrong into a right, or to create a right, quote unquote, create a right which does not exist. You can never create a right, which is why I put it in double quotes. There's no such thing as creating rights. Rights are not made by man. Rights are inherent to creation. They are already self-existing, and the universe put them there because the creator of the universe put right and wrong in place. That's it. So there is no such thing as creating a right, granting a right, which is why all forms of government are, it is absolutely utter nonsense and completely unjustified. I'm going to say a bit about natural law tonight in relation to what we know, how we know it, and the whole indoctrination system that people are put through that we call the public school system of education. They're putting upon the head this symbol of the black square in the black and white checkerboard pattern that is used in Freemasonry and other occult systems as well. The black square represents darkness. It represents ignorance. It represents the condition of not knowing. One could also say it additionally represents nescience. And I've made the distinction between nescience and ignorance quite clear on previous shows, but I'll restate it again. Nescience is not knowing or understanding something that one could not reasonably have the expectation of knowing by never having been exposed to it. Ignorance is not having information about something that one would reasonably have the expectation of having known at some point because of the information that they do have at their disposal. So in this distinction, I would unequivocally state that the human species is largely in a state of ignorance, mass ignorance, not a state of mass nescience. Ignorance is deliberately ignoring something that you do have the reasonable expectation to be able to comprehend because that information does indeed exist within your grasp. And you have the ability to take in that information through exposure to it because it is made available. And there are people who will violently deny this and violently say that that is not the case, that the human species is simply nescient, that they could not reasonably have the expectation of understanding natural law principles, of understanding the truth of what is taking place on this planet, and that this information is completely suppressed from them. And what I say to that is total bunk. Total bunk. Nonsense. And I can't make it any clearer than that. I'm just going to state that as fact. That's total, utter nonsense. The amount of information that exists in this world, of good, critical information that exists in this world, is so overwhelmingly, staggeringly immense that it can barely be even comprehended by anyone. It's ignored. Flat out ignored. Okay, it's ignored by people who should know better and want things to continue like this, that exist purely out of ego, purely out of selfishness, and it's ignored by people who just think they have enough information to get by in life. And their ego will not let them see how ignorant they indeed are, because that might admit being wrong. That's what it ultimately comes down to, folks. The most powerful 3 words in the English language. I was wrong. And I say this to the so-called educators out there who may be listening. When the ego has you, you can't admit that you're part of a system that's doing more harm than good. Also, it can't get you to admit that you may not have all the information that you need to understand what's really taking place around you. That's what ego ultimately is. The inability to admit that one is wrong. The inability to look at additional information that can bring light to something that is taking place in one's environment. That's what ego really is. The force that has the hold of the mind of the individual so much, that has hold of that psyche and the spirit, indeed, of that individual that says, I will not allow you to admit that you are wrong about this. Let's go over the cliff into the fire first, but never say those 3 words. So getting back to the symbolism of graduation, this black square is placed in a subversive position. Okay, it's not carried by the person. Okay, it's not on their shoes, right? It's on their head. It's not only on their head, it's on the top of their head. Right at the location that is traditionally referred to as the crown chakra. The vortex of energy, the vortex of energy that is the highest spiritual flow of energy that bursts forth from the human body and connects with the universe. This is the chakra that is associated in mystic traditions with the attainment of enlightenment, along with the third eye chakra. On this chakra point, at the top of the head, is placed this black covering, a black cap. And above the black circular cap, okay, so put in a superior position to even the circular shape that surrounds the neocortex. Okay, they're putting the circle around the neocortex, but covering it in a black dome. And then above that, they're putting the square. The square elevated to the position above the circle. Just as we talked about last week, the octagon elevated to this position on a cop's hat. Now, you don't just have the single square, but the double square. The mind control is completed. Not only do you believe in nonsense, you're willing to enforce it through violence, through the initiation of undue force, which you don't have the right to take against other sovereign individuals. So they're doubly insulting the cop who wears the black octagonal, 8-cornered hat. Right out in the open to anyone who has any eye and any ear to understand the language of symbology. And this is very basic symbology, the black and white checkerboard floor. Very basic symbology, the black square. See, it's saying that that the being itself is a checkered, quote unquote, checkered person. They live the checkered life. See, this is a word pun. Word puns are also used in occult symbology, particularly when it comes to mockery of an individual through symbols. And again, this will be my topic of discussion in my presentation at the Free Your Mind conference. I'm giving you a small taste of it here, but I'll be going extensively into the symbology of police and military and showing you how they are the most ritually mocked people on this planet. And the occultists who own them, and they do own them, they do. Okay, I wanted to rage against that fact in my youth when dark occultists in my involvement with them told me to my face, we own these people like dogs, and called them dogs. I could not bring myself to accept that was the level of control that they had over the person's mind. And you know what, folks? Here they are. here's the big three, I was wrong. There it is. There it is right from my mouth. Because they have a far greater level of control over these people's minds than I ever would have imagined. And I raged against that individual telling me that one day when I said, I'm going to expose this, I'm going to explain to people how they're mocked and ridiculed and what you really think of them. And they said, knock yourself out, boy, knock yourself out. Good luck. Good luck. One person went so far as to say to me, if we came there and tried to explain to people what we actually do, what we actually think of them and the power we actually have over them through our institutions, they would look at us to our face and not believe us. What chance do you have? Good luck. And that was how I left dark occultism, ladies and gentlemen, along those lines. No concern, zero concern. Zero concern that I could ever affect the minds of other individuals to take them out of that level of control. Because they know that it's not nescience. They know that it's ignorance. That this person deliberately and willfully chooses to ignore reality. Why? Because they don't want individual responsibility of their own actions. They would rather be used as a thug to do the bidding of someone that they know subconsciously, even consciously to a certain extent, is their owner. Is their owner. And I'll say that to any cop to their face. I don't care if they're a member of Oath Keepers. I don't care if they're a member of Police and Military Against a New World Order or any other tent pitcher group that exists out there that thinks the control and the initiation of violence is morally acceptable. I'll tell them right to their face, because I worked with the occultists who owned them outright. I know I get a little bit emotional when I talk about this topic. I know I have a tendency to start, getting a little bit loud and forceful with my voice, but hey, that's how I am. That's my personality. I feel I'm given powerful and potent and important to understand information, and sometimes I get a little bit passionate about it. So let's go back to the concept of the checkerboard floor of the house. This is the floor of the house because it represents the floor of the brain. It's called the floor of the house in Freemasonic parlance, in their symbolic description of what this represents, this black and white checkered floor symbology. Where do we see this? Well, we see this in the game of chess, because a chess master owns and controls the pieces. They tell the pieces how to move and what to do on the board. They're not on the board. They're above the board. They're sitting off the board. They're off the square. See, in Freemasonry, to be told that one is on the square, some people think that that is some kind of a compliment. You're being insulted if you're told you're on the square. You're being told you're in base consciousness. You're in the checkered life you're living the checkered life of a person who doesn't truly understand natural law principles. You wouldn't know light from dark if it smacked you in the face. You're a wanderer on the floor of the house, meaning in the reptile complex of the brain, because that's ultimately what this checkerboard floor represents. The base consciousness of survival-only physical world identification modality consciousness. That's what the checkerboard floor represents. The object, ladies and gentlemen, is to get off the checkerboard floor and to climb the ladder to the gods. Unity consciousness, and access to that is only granted when you go past the checkerboard floor and you go up the middle pillar, which is the unification between the left and the right brain hemispheres. I'll talk about this extensively when I cover the symbology of Freemasonry. Just a little bit of a taste tonight to understand how this black square is used in the ritual mockery that is called a graduation ceremony. And it is ritual mockery. It is not done by people. It is not invented by people who did not understand this symbology. It was invented by people who clearly understood this symbology. It is propagated by people who have no idea what they're even propagating. They have no idea that they're continuing a ritualized occult mockery of a non-initiated but a gradually indoctrinated dupe. A dupe. Okay? This is another reason here. It's more green language. This is why they called the people who wear the double square a copy. C-O-P. A cop. Cop. And yeah, you can get into the whole thing that, yes, it meant copper, because copper, you know, was what their badges are made out of, etc., so forth and so on. It doesn't make a difference. The word works out in green language, in synchromistic symbolic language, to be cop, which one could render as copy. C-O-P. Copy. Okay? It is a dupe. One who has been duplicated. A clone. And indeed, that's what they are, carbon copy cutouts, who all have been conditioned to think the same thing, namely, that they have the natural law right to initiate undue force against people because their masters told them to do so. And guess what? Even the people who think that they're lawful police, that they're going to uphold constitutional rights through force, you don't understand how natural law works. You never have, and you don't want to admit that you're wrong about how natural law works. You think you're ever going to create adherence and understanding of natural law through force, and you're wrong. The end. You don't understand how natural law works, and you don't understand that you're only pumping more chaos into the system by thinking that you're going to do that through force. You're not, and you're wrong. The end. And the sooner you admit that, the sooner you stop being controllers and thinking that control is any kind of a solution, no matter how violent humanity would ever get with each other. And you start to understand natural law is the answer, and you start to understand that only the proper propagation of the understanding of natural law through voluntary understanding, through putting this information out there in a coherent way, is the only way that we can ever solve the problem of the low level of consciousness that this species exists in. Are you ever going to make any progress? You're never going to do it through control. Sorry to break that to you, cops. Sorry to break that to you, military, okay? But you exist in a total state of ignorance. And the symbols you wear are demonstrating that to you and telling it to you at every turn. And your owners are telling you that at every turn. Okay? You don't want to hear it, but you're going to hear it. At least from me. You're going to hear it. Okay? So, that's the symbology of the checkerboard floor of the house in Freemasonry for anyone that has a true understanding of what those symbols really mean. And indeed, this is the exact consciousness that people are bred to be in upon coming out of the indoctrination system that we call, quote unquote, the public school education system in the United States. So, that is the symbol of the black square that is placed upon the head in a black robe, right upon the crown chakra the square is placed, and it's a mockery. The person is being told, you know exactly zero. You're in darkness. You're a dweller in darkness, and we're putting that right on your head to confirm it. And you have no idea what it even means. And again, they do this doubly so for cops. Not only don't you understand what you're a part of, you're willing to take action in your ignorance. So we'll double the square. We'll put two of them in the form of the octagonal hat. And indeed, look at police regalia in England. They wrap the checkerboard floor of the house, the symbol of the floor of Solomon's Temple in Freemasonry, which represents the brain, and the checkerboard floor represents the base brain or the R complex. They wrap it around the neocortex. In the band, around the hat of the cops in England, is wrapped the checkerboard floor of the house. And indeed, they go even further to insult them. It's laughable. It's actually, if it weren't so sad, I would sit there and belly laugh like they do. Because I heard them right from their lips to my ears, as I've said. hysterically laugh about this. It's a joke to them, folks. It's a laughing stock. It's a big belly laugh joke. That they're mocking people in the open, and they're too dumb to even understand that they're being mocked. And you know what? In a lot of ways, man, in a lot of ways, folks, I really think that even if they did understand it, they would just continue to go along with it. They love their servitude. They love the fact that they have masters. They love being owned because it absolves them of their personal responsibility to learn anything. They want to be dumb. They want to be ignorant. They want to just be used and abused and pushed around and told what to do so that they can say, I don't have to think. I just do. In rote, like a robot. I just do. I don't think. And we'll talk about how they're mocked through numerology as well. They're told that all you do is do. You don't think and you don't feel. It's a joke to the occultists that own these people. And you know what? I don't even try to say they don't own them anymore. They do own them. They own you. Lock, stock, and barrel. Owned. Owned. You don't understand your own sovereignty and you don't respect sovereignty in others. Therefore, you're owned.